The transport truck groaned as it rolled to a stop, kicking up a thick haze of desert dust that shimmered under the relentless Nevada sun. Heat waves rippled across the endless stretch of sand and stone, the air so dry it seemed to drink the moisture straight from a person's lungs. Recruits clambered down one by one, boots crunching against the sun-baked gravel of the U.S. military's most elite sniper training base. The site was so remote, it didn't even have a name on the map, just a set of GPS coordinates, whispered among those who dreamed of becoming legends. Last to step off was Elena Vasquez. The desert light caught her hair first, a cascade of deep auburn that flared like a streak of wildfire against the muted tan of the barren landscape. It wasn't dyed. Her mother's genetics had gifted her that unmistakable red, the color that had earned her the nickname she would soon carry like an unshakable brand. Red. She wore the standard olive drab uniform and heavy pack like everyone else. But the hair, even braided tightly, betrayed her presence from a mile away. Heads turned. Smirks followed. Is this a co-ed course? Or a fashion show? Someone muttered just loud enough for the group to hear. A ripple of laughter broke through the dry wind. Elena adjusted the strap on her pack without reacting. Her boots hit the ground with the same silent confidence she had carried since boarding the transport hours earlier. She didn't look at the man who'd spoken. She didn't look at any of them. Instead, her eyes clear, steady, the color of storm clouds swept over the horizon like a hawk assessing territory. The base sprawled ahead in a cluster of beige barracks and shooting ranges, ringed by distant mountains that shimmered in the brutal sun. Dust devils swirled like restless spirits. A faded flag snapped in the dry breeze. Fresh meat, another recruit snickered as Elena passed. Careful, a different voice replied. That hair might catch fire out here. The laughter followed her like a shadow. They weren't cruel, not exactly, at least not yet. But there was an edge to the humor, the sharp undertone of men who'd already decided she didn't belong. To them, she was either a publicity stunt or a token experiment in diversity. The elite sniper program was the crown jewel of U.S. marksmanship training. Out of hundreds of applicants, only a handful were chosen. And now here was a woman slender, young, hair like a warning flare stepping into a world built on precision, endurance, and ego. Elena kept walking. The commanding officer, a square-jawed veteran named Captain Aldridge, barked for silence. Welcome to hell, he announced, his voice carrying over the crackling loudspeaker. Over the next 8 weeks, you will eat, breathe, and dream in scopes and crosshairs. You will be broken down to nothing and rebuilt as snipers, or you will wash out. Most of you will fail. I don't care where you come from. I don't care who your daddy is. Out here, skill speaks. Everything else shuts up. His eyes swept across the line of recruits until they landed briefly on Elena. A flicker of curiosity passed over his face, gone as quickly as it came. You will address me as Captain Aldridge or Sir. You will follow every order without hesitation. You will not whine. You will not question. If you cannot handle that, get back on the truck. No one moved. Good, he said, a thin smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Grab your gear. Barracks are north side. You've got 10 minutes to settle in before orientation. The group dispersed with the chaotic energy of soldiers pretending not to be nervous. Elena followed silently, her pack heavy but familiar. Years of hiking in the Montana wilderness with her father had conditioned her to weight and distance. Her steps fell in a steady rhythm, boots crunching against gravel as the sun pounded like a drum overhead. Inside the barracks, the air was cooler, but smelled faintly of sweat and gun oil. Bunks lined the walls in tight rows. The men claimed their spots quickly, tossing duffels and cracking jokes. Elena chose a bunk in the corner and set her pack down without a word. Guess we're really doing this, a recruit across from her said, offering a tentative smile. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the sunburned face of someone who'd spent years outdoors. His name patch read Riley. Elena nodded politely. "Looks like it? You shoot?" he asked. "Enough to be here," she replied, her voice calm but clipped. He grinned. "Fair enough." Their brief exchange was interrupted by another voice, a low chuckle from a nearby bunk. "Hope you brought lipstick for the victory photo, Red," the speaker drawled. He was older, maybe early 30s, with a scar across his jaw and eyes that carried the cocky confidence of a seasoned marksman. The name on his patch read Cole. Riley shot him a warning glance, but Elena didn't react. She simply unzipped her pack and began methodically arranging her gear. Scope, cleaning kit, notebooks filled with neatly written ballistic data. Her hands moved with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. Cole watched her for a beat, then smirked. Silent treatment. Cute. Elena ignored him. Inside, a different dialogue played out a quiet, measured process of observation. She catalogued each voice, each movement. The way Cole's arrogance masked a need to dominate the room. The way Riley's friendliness carried a thread of genuine curiosity. The captain's speech echoed in her mind. Skill speaks. Everything else shuts up. Outside, a sudden crack of rifle fire split the air, sharp and clean. A training exercise, no doubt. The sound vibrated through Elena's chest, awakening a memory. She was 12 again, standing in a clearing of pine and snow, her father's steady hands guiding her aim. "Breathe," he'd whispered, his voice warm despite the cold. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." The memory tightened her chest, but steadied her heart. Her father was gone now, but his lessons were stitched into her bones. Patience, observation, calculation. Out here, those qualities would matter more than bravado. Orientation began with a tour of the facility's long ranges stretching toward shimmering horizons, obstacle courses designed to break both body and mind, and a simulation dome where recruits would face high-pressure scenarios. Captain Aldridge explained each section with military precision, his gravelly voice cutting through the dry wind. Elena listened intently, committing every landmark to memory. Each shooting lane, each wind flag, each subtle rise in terrain became a piece of a mental map. Where others squinted against the glare, she noted how the heat distorted distant objects, how mirages blurred the edges of targets. The desert spoke in whispers of wind direction and temperature shifts, and she was listening. By dusk, the recruits were exhausted. Muscles ached, throats burned, and tempers frayed. Yet Elena moved with the same quiet efficiency as when she'd arrived, unpacking, cleaning, recording data in a small leather notebook. Around her, laughter and low chatter filled the barracks, but she remained an island of silence. Cole passed by and glanced at her notes. "What's all that?" he asked, curiosity edging out mockery. "Wind patterns," she replied without looking up. "First day, and you're already charting wind?" He scoffed. "Relax, Red. You'll burn out before the real work starts." Elena closed the notebook and met his gaze for the first time. Her eyes were calm, unflinching. "I don't burn out," she said quietly. Cole smirked, but said nothing more. When lights out was called, the desert outside had cooled to a soft, ghostly chill. Stars glittered across the black sky, countless and sharp. Elena lay on her bunk, listening to the rhythmic breathing of strangers and the distant echo of rifle fire from a night exercise. Her father's words returned once more, steady and sure. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." Tomorrow would bring wind calculations, target drills, and the relentless push to separate pretenders from the truly elite. The others might see a quiet woman with red hair and a stubborn streak. But Elena knew the truth. She wasn't here to prove them wrong. She was here to prove herself right. Somewhere deep in the desert, a challenge waited, a shot no one else believed could be made. And when the moment came, Elena intended to meet it with the silence of a hunter and the precision of a legend. The desert did not forgive weakness. By dawn of the second day, the Nevada sky bled pale gold, and the air already burned with dry heat. Recruits stood shoulder to shoulder on the firing range as Captain Aldridge paced before them, boots grinding over gravel. A gust of wind scattered dust across their boots. "Welcome to your first full day of hell," he announced, his voice sharp as rifle fire. "Today we find out who can shoot and who can't. Targets at 600 meters. You will adjust for wind, heat, and mirage. You will fire until your arms shake, and then you will fire again." A chorus of "Yes, sir," snapped back. Elena Vasquez adjusted her cap and shifted her rifle on her shoulder. Around her, the recruits murmured nervously, checking their scopes and equipment. Some stretched their shoulders, others traded cocky grins. The desert heat shimmered across the vast range ahead, targets standing like ghostly silhouettes in the distance. From the corner of her eye, Elena noticed Cole, the scar-jawed veteran who'd mocked her the night before, already setting up with the relaxed posture of someone who'd done this 100 times. He caught her glance and smirked. "Hope you brought sunscreen, Red," he called loud enough for the group to hear. "Wouldn't want that fancy hair to fry before you miss your first shot?" A ripple of laughter passed through the line. Riley, the tall recruit from the bunk opposite hers, shot Cole a quick glare. "Give it a rest," he muttered. Cole shrugged with exaggerated innocence. "Hey, I'm just motivating the team." Elena neither flinched nor responded. She knelt, unzipping her rifle case with slow, deliberate movements. Inside lay a precision instrument of steel and carbon fiber, lovingly maintained. A custom M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, matte black with a long barrel that seemed to drink the morning light. While others double-checked their gear in a flurry of motion, Elena's hands moved like a metronome, steady, precise, unhurried. Captain Aldridge barked the order to load magazines. The metallic clatter of rounds echoed across the range. Elena slid each bullet into place with a soft click, her breathing even. The first series began. The crack of rifles tore through the desert silence. Brass casings bounced against gravel. Spotters called out misses and corrections in clipped tones. Heat shimmered on the horizon, distorting the view. Elena lay prone, sheet pressed lightly against the stock. Through her scope, the world narrowed to a circle of wind flags, dust, and a target no larger than a dinner plate. She inhaled slowly, exhaled half a breath, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle recoiled gently, the sound sharp and clean. "Impact," her spotter confirmed after a heartbeat. "Dead center." She cycled the bolt and fired again. Impact. Impact. Her shots landed with mechanical consistency, one after another, each nearly overlapping the last. No corrections required. While others scrambled to adjust for shifting gusts, Elena simply read the subtle ripple of mirage, compensating almost instinctively. Cole noticed. His own shots were solid, but the spotter called for windage adjustments after every other round. Glancing sideways, he saw Elena firing with serene concentration, her movements so fluid they seemed rehearsed. "Lucky streak," he muttered under his breath, as if saying it aloud might make it true. Captain Aldridge moved down the firing line, calling out observations. When he reached Elena, he paused, watching her for several seconds without comment. Her final round cracked through the dry air and punched a perfect hole in the center of the distant target. The captain's eyebrow twitched upward. "Good grouping, Vasquez," he said finally, voice neutral but eyes sharp. "Maintain." "Yes, sir," Elena replied softly. When the first drill ended, the recruits were ordered to hydrate and regroup. Sweat soaked their uniforms despite the early hour. Some grumbled about the heat, others boasted about their scores. Cole strode over to Elena as she wiped down her rifle with a clean cloth. "Not bad for your first morning," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "Beginner's luck, right?" Elena glanced at him briefly, then returned to cleaning the bolt. "Luck has nothing to do with it." Cole smirked, but his eyes narrowed. "We'll see if you can keep it up when the wind shifts." As if on cue, a sharp gust whipped across the range, sending a small cyclone of dust spiraling between them. Elena's braid lifted in the breeze, but her expression never changed. The afternoon drills intensified. Distances doubled. Recruits had to shoot from kneeling, then standing positions, forcing them to fight gravity and fatigue. The sun climbed high and merciless, baking the metal of their rifles until gloves became necessary. For most, accuracy faltered. Shoulders trembled. Sweat stung eyes. Voices grew hoarse. Yet Elena remained methodical. She read the desert like a language only she understood, the twitch of a distant flag, the faint shimmer of a mirage, the way the scent of hot sand carried hints of wind direction. Each detail fed into calculations she barely needed to write down. Her spotter, a grizzled staff sergeant assigned at random, watched her with increasing curiosity. "Where'd you learn to read wind like that?" he asked during a brief break. Elena shrugged lightly. "Montana. Mountains teach you to listen." He gave a low whistle. "Remind me not to bet against you." By late afternoon, exhaustion spread like a virus. Recruits slumped under the shade of the equipment shed, guzzling water and rubbing sore shoulders. Cole sat apart, cleaning his rifle with short, irritated motions. He'd performed well, but Elena's consistency gnawed at him. She had not missed a single target all day. Not one. When Captain Aldridge posted the preliminary scores on a portable board, murmurs rippled through the group. Cole's name sat near the top as expected, but above it, by a single flawless point, was Vasquez. Cole stared at the board, jaw tightening. Around him, whispers spread like wildfire. "Didn't see that coming. She's killing it. Red's for real." Elena, standing a few feet away, folded her score sheet without expression and slipped it into her pocket. Riley approached, grinning despite his own fatigue. "Congratulations," he said. "That was incredible." "Thanks," Elena replied simply. Cole finally stepped forward, voice laced with forced humor. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Red, early scores don't mean much when the real tests start." Elena met his gaze, calm and unwavering. "Then I guess we'll see." Evening brought physical conditioning endurance, runs across uneven terrain while carrying full gear. The desert wind cooled slightly, but offered no mercy. Recruits staggered across rocky trails as the sun bled red behind jagged mountains. Elena ran with measured strides, neither sprinting nor lagging. Every breath was calculated, every step efficient. Cole tried to overtake her on a steep incline, but his breathing grew ragged. Elena passed him without a glance, her pace steady as a metronome. Riley, running behind them, chuckled between breaths. "She's making you work for it, man." Cole gritted his teeth and pushed harder, but the gap remained. By the time they returned to camp under a sky scattered with violet clouds, muscles burned and throats felt like sandpaper. Recruits collapsed onto benches, gulping down electrolyte water. Elena quietly checked her rifle again, ensuring every component was spotless before lights out. Cole watched from across the room, frustration simmering beneath his cocky exterior. He'd mocked her as a distraction, a novelty. Now he couldn't ignore the evidence. She was outperforming most of the class, including him. Captain Aldridge entered the barracks, his gaze sweeping over the weary recruits. "Good first day," he said curtly. "Some of you impressed me. Some of you disappointed me. Remember, skill speaks." Everything else shuts up. Tomorrow, we push harder. His eyes lingered on Elena for a fraction of a second before he turned away. As the lights dimmed, Elena lay on her bunk, the murmur of tired voices fading into the desert night. Her muscles ached, but her mind was calm. She thought of her father's voice, steady, patient, as he taught her to hold the rifle against a mountain wind. The insults and doubts of the day washed away like sand in a breeze. She wasn't here to outshoot them for bragging rights. She was here to prove a truth she already knew deep inside. Precision was not a gender. Patience was not a privilege. Skill belonged to those willing to earn it. And tomorrow, the desert would give her another chance to speak without words. Night in the Nevada desert carried its own kind of silence, thick, heavy, almost alive. The heat of the day slipped away with surprising speed, replaced by a sharp chill that bit at exposed skin. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds, countless and cold. From the barracks, faint murmurs of tired recruits drifted into the open air, mixing with the distant crack of live fire exercises still echoing from the range. Elena lay on her bunk, staring at the corrugated ceiling, sleep stubbornly refusing to come. Her muscles throbbed from the day's drills, but her mind remained painfully awake. Every breath carried the scent of sand and gun oil. Around her, the barracks buzzed with low voices, laughter, curses, whispered bets about who would wash out next. She heard her name more than once, followed by muffled chuckles. "Red's a machine," someone said in a stage whisper. "Yeah, but let's see how long she lasts." Tomorrow they crank it up. Wind drills. Night ops. She fold. You think she's for real? Please, beginner's luck. Watch her drop when the pressure's on. The words weren't cruel enough to confront, but they clung like dessert grit, impossible to ignore. Elena rolled onto her side, pressing her forehead against the cool metal frame of the bunk. For all her outward calm, doubt seeped in like water through a crack. Could she really endure this? Day one had been a test of accuracy and stamina. Day two would push deeper. The instructors hadn't even begun the psychological games, sleep deprivation, surprise drills, impossible calculations under impossible conditions. She had trained for years, but training in the Montana wilderness wasn't the same as competing against seasoned marksmen who lived and breathed this life. Her father's voice surfaced unbidden, soft but clear, as though carried on the desert wind. The shot is made before you pull the trigger. She closed her eyes. The memory unfolded with perfect clarity. She was 11 years old, small hands wrapped around the wooden stock of a .22 rifle. The world smelled of pine sap and melting snow. Her father, tall and broad-shouldered, crouched beside her in the clearing. His own rifle rested across his knees, but his attention belonged entirely to her. "Patience," he whispered, his breath a warm mist in the cold morning air. "Don't fight the wind. Read it. Let it tell you what it wants." Her fingers trembled as she sighted the paper target pinned to a distant stump. "It's too far," she'd said, voice barely louder than the rustle of trees. "It's not too far," he replied, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "Distance is just numbers. Numbers can be solved. Calm your breath. Listen." The forest had fallen silent then, save for the faint whisper of wind threading through branches. She listened. Leaves quivered, a raven called in the distance, and in that moment the world seemed to slow. Her breathing steadied. When she finally squeezed the trigger, the crack of the rifle startled her, but the bullet struck dead center. Her father had smiled, eyes crinkling beneath his weathered cap. "See? The shot is made before you pull the trigger." He was gone, now taken by a heart attack when she was barely out of high school, but his lessons remained etched in her bones. Every calculation, every controlled breath, every deliberate movement traced back to those quiet mornings in the mountains. Elena exhaled slowly, letting the memory steady her heartbeat. Doubt shrank, but did not vanish. Her father's wisdom could guide her aim, but it couldn't change the brutal politics of the sniper program. She knew how these things worked. Skill mattered, but so did perception. And perception was rarely kind to someone like her. The barracks door creaked open. A figure slipped inside Riley, tall and broad-shouldered, sweat-darkened shirt clinging to his frame. He carried a canteen and moved with the tired grace of a man who'd pushed himself to the edge. "Can't sleep?" he asked quietly, noticing Alana's open eyes in the dim light. She shook her head. "Too much noise," he smirked. "Noise? You mean the desert or the egos?" "Both." He sat on the bunk across from hers, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Ignore them. They're threatened. By what? By the fact that you're better than most of them already. Trust me, I've been through enough units to recognize panic disguised as humor." Elena studied him for a moment. Riley wasn't like the others, less bravado, more quiet confidence. He treated her as an equal, not a novelty. "You think they'll ever stop?" she asked. He shrugged. "Not until you give them no choice." A wry smile flickered across her lips. "That's the plan." Before he could reply, the loudspeaker outside barked to life with Captain Aldridge's gravelly voice. "Recruits. Night readiness drill in 10 minutes. Full gear. Move." Groans erupted around the barracks. Riley grimaced. "And here we go." Elena swung her legs over the bunk and began strapping on her boots. Sleep would have to wait. The night drill was designed to break them. Under a moonless sky, recruits were ordered to navigate a kilometer of jagged desert terrain, locate hidden targets using night vision scopes, and engage with precision, all while carrying full packs and keeping complete radio silence. Any noise louder than a whisper meant immediate failure. The desert at night was a different creature. Shadows stretched and shifted like living things. The temperature plunged, and the silence was so deep it seemed to vibrate. Elena adjusted her NV goggles and followed the faint infrared markers along the route. Every crunch of gravel beneath her boots felt amplified, every breath too loud. Wind whispered across the range, carrying the scent of cold sand. Through the green-tinted view of her scope, she caught the faint outline of the first target, an 8-inch steel plate barely visible among scattered rocks. She knelt, adjusted for distance, and squeezed the trigger. The suppressed shot thudded softly. A distant ping confirmed the hit. One target down. She moved to the next position, heart steady despite the chill that numbed her fingers. Other recruits scrambled noisily across the terrain, their movements betraying haste and frustration. Elena slowed her breathing, listening to the rhythm of the desert. The wind shifted slightly east. She adjusted her aim, compensated, fired. Ping. Her spotter and instructor assigned to monitor silently gave a barely perceptible nod. Halfway through the course, she paused behind a boulder to sip water. The stars burned brighter here, millions of them, indifferent and eternal. For a fleeting moment, the magnitude of the challenge pressed against her chest. She was a small figure in an unforgiving world, surrounded by competitors who doubted her in an institution that might never fully accept her. But the memory of her father's voice returned, grounding her. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." She pressed forward. By the end of the drill, Elena had located and hit every target with near-perfect accuracy. When Captain Aldridge called them back to the assembly area, his flashlight beam cut through the darkness like a blade. "Scores will be posted at dawn," he announced. "Some of you performed adequately. A few of you surprised me. Most of you need work. Dismissed." The recruits trudged back to the barracks, boots crunching in tired rhythm. Cole walked ahead of Elena, shoulders tight, muttering curses under his breath. Riley shot her a quick grin. "Nice shooting," he whispered. Elena offered a small nod, but said nothing. Words weren't necessary. Back in her bunk, Elena finally let exhaustion settle into her bones. Her muscles ached, but the doubt that had gnawed at her earlier felt weaker now, blunted by the night's success. The whispers of mockery still floated in the air, but they no longer carried the same sting. She remembered her father standing beside her in the Montana snow, eyes bright with quiet pride. She could almost hear him now, the faint echo of his steady voice, carried across time and miles of desert. Numbers can be solved. Calm your breath. Listen. Elena exhaled slowly and closed her eyes. The desert was cruel, but it was also honest. It rewarded discipline, punished arrogance, and respected silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, harder drills, harsher tests, but tonight she had survived both the doubts of others and the doubts within herself. And survival, she knew, was only the beginning. The desert morning rose like a slow, merciless tide. A streak of molten gold bled across the horizon, burning away the night's chill. Dust hung in the still air, waiting for the first breath of wind to set it whirling. The recruits assembled in formation, their uniforms streaked with sweat and sand from the relentless days of training. They looked leaner, sharper, but also weary, every face etched with the fatigue of constant tests. Captain Aldridge stepped onto the firing platform, a clipboard tucked under one arm. His boots struck the gravel with deliberate weight, each step demanding attention. The low murmur of conversation died instantly. Even the desert seemed to hold its breath. "You've all survived the first 3 days," Aldridge began, his gravelly voice carrying across the range. "Congratulations. You can shoot straight under pressure. You can crawl through darkness without losing your nerve. You can follow orders without question. That's good." He paused, scanning the line of recruits. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, lingered on Elena for a fraction of a second before moving on. "But none of that," he continued, "means a damn thing out here. A sniper's job isn't to shoot straight when conditions are perfect. It's to make the impossible shot when everything is wrong, when the wind lies to you, when the earth itself tries to pull your bullet off course, when failure isn't an option." He flipped the clipboard open and held up a sheet of paper. "Today, you will attempt the ghost shot." A ripple of confusion passed through the recruits. Elena caught Cole raising an eyebrow. Even Riley shifted uneasily, his normally calm face tightening with curiosity. "The ghost shot," Aldridge repeated, savoring the tension, "is an exercise rarely attempted, and even more rarely achieved. The target is set at 8,000 meters. The words dropped like stones into a still pond. 8,000 meters. Nearly 5 miles. Someone let out a low whistle. Another recruit muttered, "That's impossible." Aldridge's gaze snapped toward the sound. "Nothing is impossible." "Difficult?" "Yes." "Unforgiving?" "Absolutely." "But impossible?" "Not if you have the skill and the patience." He let the silence stretch, the weight of the challenge sinking into every recruit. "You will have 3 hours to prepare, and 1 shot to prove yourself. Distance markers are removed. Wind readings are your responsibility. Bullet drop, earth curvature, temperature, all yours to calculate. No second chances. 1 shot. Hit the target, and you join an elite group of marksmen who've done the near unthinkable. Miss, and you fail the exercise. Simple." The captain's eyes hardened. "Most of you will fail. Some of you will quit before you even try. That's fine. Better to quit here than in the field, where lives depend on you." Dismissed for preparation, the recruits scattered, buzzing with nervous energy. Elena stayed still for a heartbeat longer, letting the challenge settle into her bones. 8,000 meters. Her mind instantly began running numbers, but numbers alone couldn't capture the reality of such a shot. At that distance, a bullet would spend more than 10 seconds in the air, long enough for the Earth to rotate beneath it, for the wind to shift a dozen times, for temperature gradients to bend its path. It wasn't just marksmanship. It was physics, patience, and a kind of intuition that bordered on the mystical. Cole strode past, shaking his head. 8,000 meters, he muttered. Captain's lost it. He glanced sideways at Elena, smirking despite the tension. Don't worry, Red. Nobody expects you to hit it. Elena met his eyes calmly. Good, she said. Less pressure. Her response left him momentarily speechless. He snorted and walked on, but the edge in his posture betrayed a flicker of unease. Preparation began in the equipment shed, where rifles and ballistic computers waited under the watchful eyes of instructors. Recruits scrambled for datasheets, punching numbers into calculators, arguing over the best approach. Wind flags snapped faintly outside, teasing them with inconsistent gusts. Elena claimed a quiet corner and opened her leather notebook, the same one she had carried since day one. Inside were pages of meticulous observations, wind patterns at different times of day, temperature drops at night, the way the mirage shifted across the desert floor. Each note represented hours of silent study, while others boasted or slept. She began to calculate. At 8,000 meters, bullet drop would exceed 400 feet. The Coriolis effect, the rotation of the Earth, would push the bullet several inches to the right if uncorrected. Temperature gradients would alter air density, affecting drag. She adjusted for each factor, writing numbers in clean, steady lines. The shed buzzed with frantic energy. Cole and two other recruits huddled over a laptop, arguing about wind drift. Riley worked nearby, occasionally glancing at Elena's calm, methodical process. You've done this before, he said quietly, approaching her table. Not like this, she replied without looking up. But numbers are numbers. They just need to be solved. He gave a soft chuckle. You make it sound easy. It isn't, she said, finally meeting his eyes. But panic doesn't help. Riley nodded, a flicker of respect passing through his gaze. Good luck out there. You too. 3 hours later, the recruits assembled at the range. The target, a steel plate, barely wider than a man's chest, was invisible to the naked eye, a mere suggestion on the horizon. Spotters confirmed its placement with high-powered optics. The desert heat shimmered like a living thing, bending light, hiding the target behind waves of distorted air. Captain Aldridge stood before them, arms crossed. This is it, he said. One shot. You will fire in the order you choose. Any volunteers? Silence. No one wanted to go first. The range stretched impossibly long, the air thick with tension. Finally, Cole stepped forward, his trademark smirk masking a tight jaw. I'll start, he said. Aldridge nodded. Set up. Cole lay prone, adjusting his scope with rapid, practiced movements. He fired after a long breath. The shot cracked across the desert, echoing for several seconds before silence reclaimed the air. The spotter peered through his scope, then shook his head. Miss, high right. Cole swore under his breath and rose, face flushed. He avoided Elena's gaze as he returned to the line. Another recruit stepped forward. Another miss. And another. One by one, the shots fell short or drifted wide, each failure feeding the growing sense of impossibility. Elena listened to the rhythm of defeat, her own heartbeat steady despite the mounting pressure. When the captain called for the next shooter, she stepped forward without hesitation. Vasquez, Aldrich said, his voice unreadable. Let's see what you've got. The range fell silent as she approached the firing mat. Even the wind seemed to pause, waiting. She lay flat, the rifle nestled against her shoulder, her body sinking into the sand. Through the high-powered scope, the target appeared as a faint shimmer, barely distinguishable from the mirage. She adjusted her scope, crosshairs steadied despite the tremor of distant heat. The calculations in her notebook played through her mind like a well-rehearsed melody. Wind, 3 knots northeast. Temperature, 82 degrees. Coriolis drift. Compensate 2 inches left. Her breathing slowed. The world narrowed to a single point. Inhale. Exhale halfway. Finger tightening. Click. The rifle kicked gently. The suppressed shot a muted thunder. The bullet leapt from the barrel and began its long journey 10 eternal seconds across 5 miles of desert, through shifting wind and spinning earth. Elena kept her eye on the scope, her face calm as stone. Around her, the recruits held their breath. The spotter followed the tiny streak of metal as it disappeared into the shimmering distance. Then, faint but unmistakable, a metallic ping echoed back across the range. The spotter froze. Slowly, he lowered his scope and turned to Captain Aldridge, eyes wide. "Direct hit," he said, his voice breaking the stunned silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the murmurs began low, disbelieving, growing louder like a rising tide. Aldridge's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something respect, maybe even admiration, passed through his eyes. He gave a single, sharp nod. Confirmed. Target struck. Vasquez stepped back. Elena rose smoothly, brushing sand from her elbows. She offered no smile, no outward sign of triumph. Her face remained composed, but inside, the echo of her father's voice rang like a bell. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." As she returned to the line, Cole stared at her, jaw slack. Riley grinned openly, shaking his head in awe. The legend of the Red Sniper had just begun. The desert swallowed the echoes of Elena's shot, leaving a vacuum of stunned silence. For a few seconds, it was as if time itself held its breath, unwilling to disturb the impossibility of what had just occurred. Then, like a distant rumble of thunder, voices began to rise, first whispers, then shouts of disbelief, laughter, and grudging admiration. But Elena barely heard them. Her ears were still full of the soft ring that followed every successful shot, a sound only she seemed to notice. It was the music of precision, the confirmation that every calculation, every sleepless hour of preparation, had aligned in a perfect chain. She lifted her rifle, dusted the sand from the barrel, and walked off the firing mat without a backward glance. To the recruits watching, her calm exit was more unnerving than any victory dance. Cole's smirk had vanished, replaced by an expression caught somewhere between resentment and reluctant awe. Riley, standing with his arms folded, gave her a single approving nod, his eyes glinting with quiet respect. Captain Aldridge broke the silence with a clipped command. "Reset the target for review. Vasquez, you'll give me your data sheet after the debrief." His voice carried no hint of warmth, but there was an undertone, something like satisfaction, that even Elena caught. She only nodded. "Yes, sir." The afternoon sun blazed over the Nevada range as the remaining recruits attempted their shots. Most missed badly. A few came close, but none replicated Elena's precision. Each failure only made her success feel more surreal, a feat bordering on the supernatural. By the time the last bullet had been fired, the recruits were restless and irritable, the air heavy with unspoken comparisons. Aldridge dismissed them with a wave. "You've got the evening to recover. Tomorrow, we run wind calibration drills at sunrise. Don't be late." The group dispersed, conversations bubbling like a pot about to boil over. Elena walked toward the equipment shed, rifle slung over her shoulder, her boots sinking slightly into the loose sand. Whispers trailed behind her like shadows. "Did you see that shot?" She didn't even flinch. No way that was luck. "Nobody's that lucky." Cole's voice cut through the chatter. "Lucky or not, it's one shot. Let's see her do it twice." His words carried a brittle edge, but even he couldn't disguise the grudging respect beneath the bite. Elena didn't slow. She didn't need to defend herself. The target spoke louder than any argument. Her father's words echoed softly in her mind. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." The equipment shed was cooler, the air thick with the smell of oil and steel. Elena placed her rifle on the workbench and began her ritual of cleaning. Every movement was precise and deliberate, disassembling the bolt, running a cleaning rod through the barrel, wiping each part until it gleamed. She treated the weapon like an extension of herself, a partner that demanded respect. As she worked, her thoughts drifted back to the morning's calculations. She replayed each step in her mind, searching for mistakes she might have overlooked. The perfect hit hadn't been an accident, but she knew the margin for error had been razor thin. A single misjudgment, a sudden gust of wind, a tiny temperature drop, could have sent the bullet inches off target, and at 8,000 meters, inches might as well be miles. Still perfecting perfection? A voice said behind her. Elena looked up to see Riley leaning casually against the doorway, his ever-present calm smile in place. "Just maintenance," she replied, returning to her work. "Perfection doesn't last if you neglect it." He chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it. You know, I've seen instructors take that shot and miss. What you did today." He shook his head. "It'll be talked about for a long time." "Then let them talk," Elena said evenly. "The shot's over. There's more work to do." Riley tilted his head, studying her. "You really don't care about the attention, do you?" "I care about the mission," she said, wiping the bolt with a clean cloth. "Attention doesn't hit targets." For a moment, Riley said nothing. Then he pushed off the doorframe and gave a small nod. "Fair enough. For what it's worth, I'm glad I was here to see it." As he left, Elena caught a flicker of something in his eyes: admiration, yes, but also curiosity, as if he sensed there was more to her story than she revealed. Night settled over the base with a heavy stillness. The stars burned sharp and bright above the endless desert, their cold light cutting through the heat haze that lingered from the day. In the barracks, most recruits slept in exhausted heaps, their snores filling the cramped space. Elena sat cross-legged on her bunk, her notebook open across her knees. She flipped through the pages, reviewing her notes like a scholar, poring over ancient texts. Each entry was a breadcrumb leading back to her father. She could almost hear his voice. Patience. Calculation. The target is more than distance. It's time. Air and gravity all conspiring against you. It wasn't nostalgia that drove her to remember. It was focus. Her father had taught her that mastery wasn't a destination but a journey. The ghost shot might have earned her respect today, but tomorrow would bring a new challenge. Complacency was the enemy of precision. Outside, the desert wind whispered across the barracks, carrying the faint smell of sagebrush and distant rain. Elena closed her notebook and lay back on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling. The adrenaline of the day still hummed in her veins, but beneath it lay a deeper current, purpose. She wasn't here for applause. She was here because somewhere, someday, a mission would require a shot even harder than today's, and she intended to be ready. The next morning broke with a pale pink dawn. Recruits stumbled from their bunks, rubbing sleep from their eyes as they prepared for wind calibration drills. The ghost shot had left its mark. Conversations were quieter, glances sharper. Where there had once been open mockery, now there was cautious respect. As they assembled on the range, Captain Aldridge paced before them, his eyes scanning the group with hawk-like precision. When his gaze settled on Elena, it lingered for a beat longer than the rest. "Yesterday," he began, "we witnessed something extraordinary. Some of you might think it was luck. It wasn't. It was preparation, discipline, and execution. Remember that. Skill is not born in the moment. It's built long before you step onto the line. His eyes flicked briefly to Elena. And some of you proved that beyond doubt. A murmur rippled through the ranks, but Aldridge raised a hand for silence. Today, we go back to fundamentals. Wind calibration. Range finding. No miracles, just hard work. Let's see who's paying attention. The recruits broke into teams. As they worked, Elena moved with quiet efficiency, measuring gusts with an anemometer, cross-checking readings with her notebook. Cole, stationed a few yards away, watched her with narrowed eyes. His earlier ridicule was gone, replaced by a simmering determination. "Don't think yesterday means you've won," he said under his breath as she passed. "One shot doesn't make you the best." Elena paused, meeting his gaze evenly. "One shot doesn't need to," she replied. "But it was enough for yesterday." She left him standing there, the faintest flicker of a smile tugging at her lips. By midday, the sun blazed overhead, turning the desert into a shimmering furnace. Sweat streaked the recruits' faces as they adjusted scopes and recalibrated their rifles. Elena worked steadily, her mind calm despite the heat. Every gust of wind, every shift of air density was another opportunity to sharpen her craft. As the day wore on, the murmurs about her shot began to fade, replaced by the rhythm of training. But the memory of that impossible hit lingered like a ghost over the range, a silent reminder that precision, preparation, and patience could defy even the harshest odds. For Elena Vasquez, the lesson was clear. Yesterday's miracle was only the beginning. The desert would demand more, and she intended to give it. The morning of the final trial broke sharp and cold, the kind of desert dawn that slices through sleep and leaves the air trembling with possibility. A thin frost clung to the sparse sagebrush, glittering faintly as the first light crept over the barren hills. From her bunk, Elena awoke to the sound of boots scuffing on gravel and the low murmur of recruits preparing for another day of tests. She sat up slowly, the metallic tongue of gun oil lingering in the air, and let her eyes adjust to the pale light. Today was different. She felt it in the way the silence pooled between breaths, in the way every motion around her carried an edge of anticipation. The ghost shot might have cemented her reputation, but Captain Aldridge had promised that the true test was still to come. As she tightened the laces on her boots, Elena's mind replayed her father's lessons like a well-worn record. The shot is made before you pull the trigger. Preparation was everything. Execution was merely the proof. She had lived by those words through every drill, every insult, every calculated breath. Today, they would be her armor. Outside, the range stretched like an endless ocean of sand and shadow. The recruits gathered in a loose formation, their faces pale against the rising sun. Even Cole, usually quick with a smirk or cutting remark, stood silent, jaw tight as he adjusted the strap of his rifle. The air smelled faintly of dust and cold steel scent that carried the promise of challenge. Captain Aldridge stepped onto the platform with a deliberate calm, clipboard in hand. His weathered face betrayed nothing, but his voice cracked through the morning like a rifle shot. "Today is your final evaluation," he announced. "You've trained. You've calculated. You've pushed your limits. Now you will prove you can do it under combat conditions." He paused, letting the words sink in. "This exercise will test everything: precision, endurance, mental resilience. You'll fire at a moving target at a range beyond standard engagement distance. Crosswinds will be manipulated. You will have one shot to demonstrate mastery. There will be no second attempt." A ripple of unease passed through the recruits. A moving target at long range meant chaos variables multiplying by the second, every breath of wind a potential enemy. Aldridge's eyes swept the line, landing briefly on Elena. "Your order of fire will be randomized. You will not know when your name is called. Prepare accordingly. The recruits broke formation, each finding their own corner of the range to settle nerves and run calculations. Some hunched over ballistic charts, their brows furrowed in concentration. Others paced like caged animals, rifles clutched tightly, adrenaline already bleeding into their movements. Elena walked to the far edge of the staging area, where the sand met a low ridge. She knelt, unrolling her leather notebook and scanning the familiar columns of numbers. The morning wind was unpredictable, gentle one moment, sharp the next. She noted the shifts, marking each subtle change in her mind. Her breathing slowed, falling into the rhythm of the desert. Behind her, voices rose and fell, the rasp of nervous laughter, the bark of instructors issuing last-minute commands. Cole's voice cut through the air. "This is where luck runs out," he muttered to no one in particular. "Let's see who's really got the skill." Elena didn't turn. The desert didn't care about luck, and neither did she. Hours passed as the recruits took their turns. One by one, they lay prone, adjusted their scopes, and fired into the shifting distance. Some shots came close. Most fell wide. The moving target, a steel silhouette gliding along a narrow track thousands of meters away, proved merciless. Even the slightest miscalculation sent bullets screaming harmlessly into the sand. Elena watched quietly as each competitor rose in defeat. Riley managed a near miss that drew murmurs of admiration. Cole's shot veered left at the last second, the metallic ping of failure ringing in his ears. He cursed under his breath and stalked off the line, shoulders tight with frustration. Finally, Captain Aldridge raised his voice. "Vasquez." Step forward. The air seemed to thin around her name. Recruits straightened unconsciously, their fatigue forgotten as they turned to watch. Even the wind paused, the desert holding its breath. Elena walked to the firing mat with measured steps, each one sinking slightly into the soft sand. She lowered herself into position, the rifle's weight settling against her shoulder like an old friend. Through the scope, the world narrowed to a distant shimmer. The moving target, a faint silhouette gliding back and forth across the horizon. She began her process. Wind speed, 7 knots, variable gusts. Temperature, rising with the morning sun, affecting air density. Distance, farther than any practical engagement, but not impossible. Coriolis effect, minor but significant. Each calculation clicked into place like the tumblers of a safe. Her breathing slowed until the beat of her heart matched the rhythm of the target's motion. From behind, Aldridge's voice carried across the range. "Shooter ready?" Elena didn't answer with words. Her silence was the answer. She inhaled slowly, exhaled halfway, and let the world shrink to a single perfect point. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Click. The muted crack of the rifle echoed across the desert, swallowed quickly by the vast emptiness. For a long, endless second, nothing happened. The bullet traveled its impossible path, fighting the fickle winds and the slow rotation of the earth itself. Then a sound. Faint at first, then unmistakable. Ping. The target lurched under the impact, a perfect center hit. For a heartbeat, the range was silent. No whispers. No movement. Only the ringing echo of success cutting through the dry air. Then the silence broke. Gasps. Shouts. A low, stunned murmur that swelled into something like applause. Captain Aldridge lowered his binoculars slowly. For the first time since the program began, a small smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "Direct hit," he said, his voice carrying an edge of admiration. Textbook execution. Elena remained prone for a moment longer, eyes still fixed on the distant target. She felt no rush of triumph, only the quiet satisfaction of a plan fulfilled. Slowly she rose, brushing sand from her elbows. Her face betrayed nothing. As she stepped away from the mat, recruits parted instinctively to let her pass. Some nodded in silent respect. Others simply stared, their earlier ridicule replaced by something closer to awe. Cole, leaning against the equipment rack, met her eyes as she passed. His jaw tightened, but the usual sarcasm was gone. After a long pause, he gave a short, grudging nod. It wasn't friendship, but it was acknowledgement. Riley broke the tension with a low whistle. "I don't know how you do it," he said, falling into step beside her. "That shot. It's like you bend the laws of physics." Elena glanced at him, her expression calm. "Physics bends if you listen long enough," she said quietly. "You just have to let the world tell you what it's doing." Riley chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Remind me never to bet against you." The debriefing that followed was brief and clinical. Captain Aldridge reviewed the day's results, his tone professional, but carrying a rare undercurrent of respect. When he dismissed the group, he called Elena forward. "You've done what few snipers even attempt," he said, handing her the data sheet from her shot. "Precision like that isn't luck. It's discipline. Whatever your reasons for being here, don't lose that edge. The field will demand it." Elena met his gaze evenly. "Yes, sir." He gave a single nod. Dismissed. That night, the desert wind carried a different sound across the base, a quiet, collective recognition. The recruits still spoke of Elena Vasquez, the red sniper, but the tone had shifted. Gone were the mocking jokes and whispered doubts. In their place was something rarer, harder earned, respect. Elena lay awake on her bunk, staring at the ceiling as the stars wheeled silently overhead. The desert had tested her. The shot had been made. But deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the endless horizon, a real mission waited one where the stakes would be far higher than a distant target and a score on a clipboard. Her father's voice came back to her, soft as the desert wind. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." Elena closed her eyes and breathed in the quiet night. The day of reckoning had passed, but the path of the red sniper was only just beginning. The metallic ping of Elena's bullet, striking dead center, still seemed to vibrate through the desert air long after the sound itself faded. For a heartbeat, the world felt suspended rifles half raised, binoculars frozen in midair, every recruit locked in the same stunned stillness. Even the restless desert wind seemed to hesitate, as though unwilling to disturb the fragile weight of the moment. Then the silence cracked. A single voice, sharp with disbelief, cut through the stillness. "No way." It was followed by another, softer but no less odd. "She hit it. Dead center. Moving target. 8,000 meters." The murmurs spread like ripples across a still pond. Heads turned toward Elena, some wide-eyed with admiration, others narrowing in reluctant respect. Cole, who had once made sport of every step she took, stared openly now, his mouth parted as though searching for words that refused to come. Beside him, Riley exhaled a low whistle and shook his head with a half-smile. Captain Aldridge remained motionless for a long moment, his binoculars still raised. Then, with deliberate calm, he lowered them and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire range. "Direct hit. Confirmed center mass." The words fell like a verdict. No debate, no ambiguity. Elena Vasquez had done what few snipers in the world could even dream of attempting. A sharp, involuntary cheer rose from somewhere near the back of the formation, quickly smothered by the collective awe. This wasn't a victory that invited loud celebration. It demanded something different, quiet recognition of mastery. Elena remained prone for a few seconds longer, her cheek still pressed to the cool stock of her rifle. Through the scope, she could just make out the faint silhouette of the target, now swaying slightly from the force of the impact. She didn't smile. She didn't pump her fist or glance back for approval. Her breathing was steady, her mind already replaying the shot in reverse. Wind drift calculations, minute scope adjustments, the slow squeeze of the trigger. Only when she was certain every step had been perfect did she rise. She stood slowly, brushing the fine grit of desert sand from her elbows. Her crimson hair, caught by a sudden gust, flashed like a signal flare against the pale sky. The recruits instinctively stepped aside as she walked back toward the staging line. No one spoke. The silence followed her like a shadow, heavier than any applause. Cole finally found his voice. "How?" he began, then stopped. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression caught somewhere between frustration and wonder. "That shot. Nobody does that." Elena met his gaze briefly. Her eyes held no challenge, no smugness, only a quiet certainty. "It wasn't the shot," she said evenly. "It was the preparation." Cole opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, the words dying before they could form. Riley stepped forward next, a grin spreading across his face despite the hushed atmosphere. "You just rewrote the definition of impossible," he said softly. "I've never seen anything like it. Impossible is just a calculation," Elena replied. Her tone wasn't boastful. It was matter-of-fact, the way one might comment on the time of day. Captain Aldridge approached, his boots crunching against the gravel. The recruit straightened instinctively, the weight of his presence cutting through the haze of disbelief. He stopped directly in front of Elena and studied her for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. "Vasquez," he said finally, his voice low but carrying. "You've just accomplished a shot that most seasoned professionals will never achieve. That was no accident. That was discipline, skill, and an understanding of this craft that goes beyond raw talent." He held her gaze, the faintest glimmer of respect in his eyes. "Remember this moment, but do not cling to it. Out in the field, you will not have the luxury of perfect conditions or a cheering audience. Every mission demands this level of preparation. Nothing less." "Yes, sir," Elena said quietly. Aldridge gave a single nod. Dismissed. As the recruits dispersed, their conversations carried a different tone now, no longer the mocking jabs of previous days, but low, almost reverent discussions about calculations, bullet trajectories, and the sheer improbability of what they had just witnessed. "Did you see how steady she was?" One whispered. "She didn't even flinch when the wind shifted." "I swear the desert went," silent for her. Elena walked past them without slowing, the murmurs trailing behind her like the wake of a passing ship. The respect was palpable, but it wasn't what she sought. She carried only the satisfaction of knowing that every lesson, every patient hour of practice had come together in a single perfect execution. Back at the equipment shed, she set her rifle on the workbench and began her ritual cleaning. The familiar motions, disassembling the bolt, running the cleaning rod through the barrel, calmed her like a meditation. Around her, recruits moved more quietly than usual, their earlier bravado stripped away. Some glanced in her direction with hesitant curiosity, as though approaching a dangerous but fascinating animal. Riley lingered near the doorway, arms crossed, watching her work. "They'll be talking about this for years," he said finally. "Let them," Elena replied without looking up. "Tomorrow there's more training. Today's shot won't hit tomorrow's target." Riley tilted his head, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You really don't let it touch you, do you?" Elena paused, wiping a thin smear of oil from the rifle's bolt. "It's not about me. It's about the mission. And the mission isn't finished." He gave a low chuckle. "Fair enough. Still, it's something to see." That evening, as the desert sky deepened from crimson to indigo, Alana sat alone on the low ridge beyond the barracks. Stars began to pierce the twilight, sharp and cold against the endless black. The day's heat faded into a chill that bit at her skin, but she barely noticed. Her notebook lay open on her knees, the faint light of a small red flashlight illuminating the pages. She reviewed her notes from the shot wind patterns, air pressure, humidity, the precise timing of the trigger pull. Not to relive the glory, but to learn. There were always variables she could refine, calculations she could tighten. A soft crunch of gravel announced someone's approach. Without looking up, she knew it was Riley. "You always take notes after a win?" he asked, settling beside her. "It's not a win," Elena said, eyes still on the page. "It's data. If I don't learn from success, I'll forget what made it possible." Riley leaned back on his elbows, gazing up at the sky. "Most people would just celebrate. Most people miss," she replied. He chuckled softly. "Fair point." For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, the desert wind whispering across the sand. Then Riley spoke again, quieter this time. "You know, when you first got here, a lot of us thought you were just different. Easy target for jokes. I was wrong. Everyone was." Elena closed her notebook and finally turned to look at him. "People see what they expect to see," she said. "It doesn't change the target. It doesn't change the wind. It doesn't change the shot." Rayleigh met her gaze and nodded slowly, as if absorbing more than just her words. Back in the barracks, the atmosphere had shifted. The recruits who once snickered behind her back now moved aside when she entered, their conversations halting mid-sentence. Some offered nods of acknowledgement. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Cole stood near the doorway, arms crossed tightly across his chest. As Elena passed, he spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "You proved it wasn't luck," he said, his voice grudging but honest. "Respect." Elena paused, turning slightly toward him. "It was never about luck," she said quietly. "It was always about the work." Cole gave a curt nod, nothing more, but the gesture carried more weight than any apology. Later, when the lights dimmed and the barracks fell into a restless sleep, Elena lay awake on her bunk. The day's events replayed in her mind, not as a triumphant victory, but as a series of precise, measurable steps: wind, distance, breath, trigger. Beyond the thin walls, the desert stretched silent and infinite. Somewhere out there, real missions waited. Missions where lives, not reputations, would hang on a single perfect shot. Today's feat was a beginning, not an ending. Her father's voice came back to her in the quiet darkness, calm and steady as always. "The shot is made before you pull the trigger." Elena closed her eyes, letting the words settle into her bones. Tomorrow, the world would remember the red sniper. But tonight, under the cold stars of the Nevada desert, she remained exactly who she had always been, a quiet hunter, sharpening her edge for the challenges still to come. Morning arrived with a crisp desert chill, the sky washed in pale lavender as the first light crept over the Nevada mountains. The sniper range lay quiet, the echoes of yesterday's impossible shot still hanging in the dry air like a ghost. For most recruits, dawn meant another punishing day of drills. For Elena Vasquez, it meant something different, a subtle shift, a new chapter already unfolding before she even opened her eyes. The barracks stirred around her with the usual clatter of boots and gear. But something had changed. Gone were the sidelong glances and stifled snickers that had once followed her like a shadow. Now the silence held a new weight. Respect had replaced ridicule. The same men who once mocked her crimson hair now avoided eye contact, as though fearing they might betray the awe they carried inside. Elena moved with her usual quiet efficiency, folding her blanket, lacing her boots, checking the precision of each knot. Her routine was unchanged. That was the point. Yesterday's shot, however extraordinary, did not alter who she was. To celebrate or gloat would be to cheapen it. The work mattered more than the praise. Outside, the desert smelled faintly of gun oil and sun-warmed sand. Captain Aldridge stood near the shooting line, arms crossed as he surveyed the recruits. His gaze lingered on Elena for a moment, an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, before he barked the day's orders. No mention of the record-breaking shot. No applause. Only another grueling schedule of drills and calculations. It was, in its own way, the highest compliment he could offer. As the morning session began, Elena found herself flanked by recruits who had once treated her as an outsider. Cole, the loudest of her early critics, approached hesitantly. He carried his rifle like a peace offering, the usual smirk absent from his face. "Hey, Vasquez," he said, voice low. "About yesterday." "You don't owe me anything," Elena interrupted without looking up. "No," Cole said firmly. "I do. I was wrong. I didn't think. Hell, I didn't even imagine what you pulled off was possible. I gave you a hard time because," he paused, rubbing the back of his neck, "because I didn't think you belonged here. But you proved me wrong. And I respect that." Elena finally met his eyes. There was no triumph in her expression, only steady calm. "It's not about proving anyone wrong," she said. "It's about proving the shot right." Cole blinked and gave a slow nod. "Fair enough." He extended a hand, rough and calloused from weeks of training. Elena shook it once, firm and brief. No more words were needed. Riley ambled over next, his easy grin breaking the tension. "You know, Red," he said, using the nickname with a warmth that felt different now, "I heard some of the instructors talking. Word about your shot is already making the rounds. Apparently, a few guys at Fort Bragg think it's a myth. They don't believe anyone could pull off an 8,000-meter hit." Elena adjusted her scope, her voice as level as ever. "Let them doubt. It doesn't change the target," Riley chuckled. "You're something else." By afternoon, whispers of her achievement had traveled beyond the range. Technicians, instructors, and even senior officers appeared at the edge of the field, drawn by the story of the Red Sniper. Some carried high-powered binoculars to inspect the distant target for themselves, as though the neat puncture at its center might offer proof of the impossible. Others simply watched Elena with quiet fascination, searching for the secret behind her calm precision. Requests for interviews began almost immediately. A training coordinator approached her during a water break, clipboard in hand and a hopeful gleam in his eyes. "Specialist Vasquez," he began. "Defense News is requesting a statement. They'd like to feature you in an article about female marksmen." "No," Elena said before he could finish. The coordinator blinked, startled. "It would be good publicity for the program." "For you, I'm here to serve," she said flatly. "Not to pose for cameras." He opened his mouth to argue, then caught the unyielding look in her eyes and thought better of it. With a stiff nod, he retreated, muttering something about protocol. The refusal was not about humility or shyness. Elena understood the danger of fame. Attention was a distraction, a crack in the armor of focus. A sniper's greatest weapon was invisibility, not just on the battlefield, but in the mind. That evening, after the final drills, Captain Aldridge summoned her to his office. The small, utilitarian room smelled faintly of dust and coffee. He gestured for her to sit, but remained standing, his posture as rigid as ever. "Vasquez," he began, his voice steady, "I've been contacted by Central Command. They've reviewed yesterday's performance and the reports from your instructors. They want you considered for a special operations unit. Overseas assignment. Classified missions. It's a fast track, but it comes with risks you can't yet imagine." Elena sat perfectly still, processing his words. "I understand the risks, sir." "I believe you do," Aldridge said, studying her with a keen, almost fatherly gaze. "But understand this, Yesterday's shot isn't just a record. It's a test of character. Fame will tempt you. Ego will whisper in your ear. Don't let either compromise the discipline that brought you here. Yes, sir, Elena said simply. Aldridge gave a single, approving nod. Good. Dismissed. Later, as night draped the desert in velvet black, Elena climbed the ridge beyond the barracks. The stars were impossibly sharp, glittering like distant tracer rounds across the sky. She sat cross-legged, her rifle resting beside her, and let the quiet seep into her bones. Her father's voice surfaced once more, calm and unwavering. The shot is made before you pull the trigger. She thought of the little girl who had once sat beside him in the Montana wilderness, learning to feel the wind through trembling leaves. He had taught her that precision was not about power, it was about respect. Respect for the weapon, the environment, and the life-altering weight of each bullet. That philosophy had carried her here, to this moment where the world finally saw what she already knew. Mastery is not about noise. It's about silence. Behind her, faint footsteps crunched over the sand. Riley emerged from the shadows, carrying 2 steaming mugs of instant coffee. He offered one without a word. Elena accepted it with a nod. They sat together in companionable quiet, the desert wind whispering through the sparse brush. After a while, Riley spoke, his voice low. You know, people are going to tell this story for a long time. The shot, the distance, the way you just walked away. They'll turn it into a legend. Elena stared out at the endless horizon. Legends fade, she said softly. But the work stays. Riley smiled faintly. Maybe, but I think some legends deserve to stay a little longer. Neither spoke again for a long time. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, each one a distant reminder of infinite precision. Weeks later, Elena departed the Nevada range with no ceremony. There was no parade, no camera crew waiting to immortalize her achievement. She left as quietly as she had arrived, her crimson hair tucked beneath the same plain cap. Only those who had witnessed the shot truly understood what she carried with her, not just the skill to change the course of missions, but the discipline to remain unchanged by recognition. Instructors would speak her name in hushed tones to new recruits. Her shot would become a benchmark, a myth whispered across sniper schools and training grounds. The day a young woman with red hair silenced a desert full of doubters with a single bullet. But Elena Vasquez never sought to be a story. Her focus remained on the next mission, the next calculation, the next breath before the trigger. For her, the legacy was not in the applause, but in the silence after the shot, the moment when the world holds its breath and the impossible becomes real.